So after having procrastinated for freaking ages, and also after being sick for over a week and still recovering, I'm finally back, and today we're going to talk about the X2H and the X2H Mini. I know that these mice are almost ancient by now, despite only having been released a few months ago, but I figured I should cover them just because I had quite some issues with these mice. And I really want to provide some feedback because these mice really are suboptimal. And if you want to know why you probably shouldn't get any of these two mice, definitely continue watching this video because we'll go a bit more in depth this time. But before you do that, definitely make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell right next to it in order to get notified for all my upcoming reviews, because I'm constantly covering new and also ancient stuff in this mouse enthusiast scene. Now, as a quick disclaimer, none of these mice were sent out to me by Pulsar themselves. However, the X2H Mini was sent out to me by Cirque Gaming Mods, and this copy was sent out to me by Pistachio because he no longer needed it after this panda swap that he did. So huge shout out to those people, love you guys. And also, just because I already can see some comments, these are not ancient, these are actually fairly new mice, but by the time that this video actually releases, there have been so many new mice that just absolutely outperformed them in every single segment, not specifically in the tech segment, but especially when it comes to mouse engineering. And as always, all my opinions are my own. Now, getting into the boring stuff, the unboxing experience is still the same as ever before with Pulsar. You get your mouse in here, your average USB-C to USB-A dongle, the 1K receiver itself. The 4K receiver is not included because that is available separately for around $20. And then you do also get a USB-A to USB-C cable. The cable itself is pretty flexible, but not the most flexible in the entire world. And then you also get a player card and a sticker and some trash. Now, when it comes to the weight of these two mice, the medium version comes in at around 54.4 grams, and my mini version with super glide skates is around 53 grams. So nothing crazy, but not bad whatsoever. Really decent. But what I dislike about these mice is how they're engineered and how the switches are implemented. So if you didn't know, these mice come with Raycha opticals. Now, out of all the opticals that are available, these are probably the least favorite ones by the community. I really don't know how to describe the actual click feel, but it kind of feels like you're hitting a light switch. It just has this very weird implementation that just feels very cheap and also just nothing like any other mouse out there, and that is meant in a very negative way. The biggest issue that people have with these mice are sticky clicks. And the reason to those sticky clicks is because there are rubber pads that actually help with the post travel that they have implemented here in these two mice. They also use these rubber pads in some of their other mice, especially the X2V2, but I've heard that from the new Dragon Slayer versions that it is better. But then again, I just hate the fact that you need to buy the latest color edition just because it has these tiny little improvements over the other models, when really it should just be one good mouse from the beginning on. It is simply really shitty for the consumer to be kind of forced to buy the latest new version just to get these small improvements that everybody is complaining on the first editions. And I think that one reason why this is happening is Pulsar is getting really big. Pulsar is getting so big to the point where I feel that us reviewers can't really give them feedback early enough to actually improve these mice. A great part of the mouse enthusiast reviewer scene, we actually have a group chat together, and when talking to each other, basically nobody of us gets these very first batches or even a pre-release batch. Now, I didn't even get these mice from Pulsar themselves. I got these sent out by a retailer and by a friend of mine. And what I mean with that is that I couldn't get these units early enough to actually provide feedback before they enter mass production. And I feel that Pulsar is really big. They have their own R&D team, and that's all fun and games until you get sticky clicks with all the units that you send out to consumers. So what I would love to see with Pulsar would be if they could send out units before mass production, get feedback from reviewers, pro players, whatever. Just get really useful feedback from people who know what they're talking about, who have 50 mice hanging right next to them, so that the consumer gets a better product and doesn't have to live with sticky clicks and just hate their mouse. Spending around $100 for something that feels worse than a Chinese mouse that you can get for $40, it's not a good look. What I would recommend to Pulsar and any other brand out there is just provide units before mass production for reviewers and others so that you can get useful feedback and come out with a better product, because you win as the brand itself because you have a better product, the consumer wins because the consumer gets a better product, and everybody wins because Pulsar just becomes a better brand. So if you want to fix this yourself, Melon FPS actually made a video for this issue and how you could resolve it yourself. Some people also recommend putting aluminum tape over the rubber pads, or actually replacing the rubber pads with a thicker layer of aluminum tape so that you don't have that post-travel anymore, and that you also don't have that sticky feeling because of that rubber pad kind of gripping to the outer shell of the click. So what I want to tell Pulsar here is have a word with your mouse engineer and come up with a new system. Only because you've been using the same post-travel reduction system since the beginning doesn't mean that it actually works. Not a single one of my over 40 mice that I have lying around here have this issue. This really just is a skill issue. And now to the second big issue I want to talk about. On all of the early batches on the X2H mini and also the medium when it first released, I had hella friends in our scene having insane issues with their mice either breaking, no longer tracking correctly, not being able to connect to the dongle anymore, and that is coming from my friend Stubby FPS and also others in the scene. And I can confirm that even on this model, if they want to check it out themselves, I'm having severe tracking issues. Now I'm using the Super Glide skates here on the mini version, and even though I put the liftoff distance to 2mm instead of 1mm, I cannot track with this mouse correctly, and it is not even because of the liftoff distance. Even when I press my mouse down into the surface of a softer pad and I get close enough to that surface to track it correctly, in theory, I have severe sensor skipping, so I basically can't use my mouse anymore. And that is despite being on the latest firmware. So this mouse is basically unusable for me personally. I could definitely RMA this thing because it's not working correctly, but I personally don't care. Now, when it comes to these two actual shapes, I've gotten so many questions about the X2H mini, especially over the past few months, and I kept repeating that this mouse shape is very awkward, and it is probably the furthest away from a safe recommendation that it could possibly be. Now, of course, shape is insanely subjective, but if I want to give people a safe recommendation for what to get on a market that is so insanely flooded these days, I wouldn't even mention this thing. The hump is insanely steep. It already looks insanely steep on camera, but when you actually grip it, it feels like you're kind of gripping a wall. Imagine you have to like grip a mouse that has a back that is this steep, and you need to grip it like that. That is how it feels to hold an X2H mini, especially because it is so short with that insanely steep hump. Not a single one of my 40+ mice have a hump this steep. So if you're just looking for a mouse with the steepest hump out there, these mice are definitely something for you. Now, even the LA1, which kind of reassembles that CA vibe of a hump, it doesn't feel nearly as steep as these two things. When you compare these two mice to each other, you can definitely see a huge difference in that steepness towards the rear. And that is simply also why I can't compare this mouse to any of my mice. Nothing comes close to these things whatsoever. The only fair comparison I could give you is the X2 Mini and the X2H, where you can see how much steeper that hump is towards the rear and how steep it looks visually. It actually feels twice as steep in your hands. The camera and the angle and the visuals just simply don't do the steepness justice. And then also you have a tiny bit more curvature towards the middle, which is the biggest difference between these two models. In hand, I prefer the feeling of the normal X2 Mini way more over the X2H, mainly because the X2H mini just feels really awkward and like kind of stubby. Then again, that doesn't mean that this mouse couldn't fit you. If you really want that very steep hump to support your claw grip or even palm grip it just because it has that much of a dumpy, then this might just be the perfect mouse for you. If all of these mice on the market aren't nearly steep enough for you, get this thing. Also, here's a comparison between the normal X2H medium and the X2 medium on the left. Yet again, as you can see, the normal X2 medium simply looks like a flat mouse compared to this thing. And here's also a comparison from the beneath, where you can clearly see how much more curvature that the X2H has. In my personal opinion, these are subjectively very unsafe shapes, and I really don't like the design of them personally, and I don't think that they make too much sense in the market being as huge as a brand that Pulsar now is. I would definitely recommend them to go a different route with their next mice and make something more viable for all users, because they're getting really big. The coating is actually really freaking good. Coming from the old slippery Pulsar mice back then with the X-Lite wired and also the original X-Lite wireless and the V2 as well, these are much improved. These are very rubbery, very grippy, and especially as soon as your hand get warm, these things really grip perfectly. Yet again, with the Demon Slayer mice, it feels even better to me personally, especially because they don't feel and get as oily. But I think that that's mostly because of the designs that these actually include, so you don't see the oiliness as well, but you can definitely see a bit of oil build up on these mice. These are some of the nastiest mice in my collection. Other than that, I can't see anybody having an issue with this coating. When it comes to these skates, I don't have the stock skates anymore on these things because I don't really enjoy them. These are just solid white PTFE skates, not 100%, and they just feel kinda harsh on most of my mouse pads, being that harder PTFE material. So if you are an enthusiast that cares about mouse skates, definitely go get some core pads or something similar. Now, when it comes to the buttons, I don't think we need to talk about the main clicks anymore. These are probably my least favorite Switch implementation in the entire market right now. They feel kinda stiff and also very light at the same time, and they feel like I'm flickering a light switch. That is the best way that I could describe them. It just feels insanely unconventional and not really that tactile. It just feels bad. It's super hard to describe it, and you kind of need to feel it for yourself. But in terms of side buttons, they are fine. They are a tiny bit heavy to press in, and they don't feel as tactile as other modern day implementations. They do feel a tiny bit too heavy and too mushy, but it's not that horrible. The scroll is actually very light. Not as light as the GPX2, but definitely on the lighter side. It still has the steps that you can feel, and when you press down mouse free, it is an enjoyable experience that is also spammable and not too hard. When it comes to the battery life, it is pretty mid, as always with Pulsar mice, just as with G-Wolf's mice, though not as bad on these ones. If you are running 4K, prepare yourself to recharge these mice every 2 or 3 days, and if you're on 1K, if you're lucky, you can get up to 5 days. At least that's what it was like for me with daily permanent usage. And once again, I also want to remind you that the 4K dongle is around $19, so it is definitely more expensive than most, but once you plug it in, it does look pretty sick with that light inside. And also, you can't change the color of the LED. I just wanted to mention that because some people do wonder about that. And in terms of software, let's have a look together. On the main page, you can choose your mouse. Here you can either enable or disable motion sync. You can change the debounce time. I personally have it set to 2. You can change your DPI. And if you've got the 4K dongle paired and connected, you can go up to 4K here. I've personally been playing on 1K hertz constantly because I'm having issues on Fortnite. And you can also set your DMA hacks up here. Also, since I didn't go in depth on 4K, I want to talk about it a bit here. From the very little testing I've done, the saturation seems absolutely fine. I don't want to go into deep tech specs and schizoing the fuck out over polling rate saturation. All I can say is that it's definitely going to be better than the 4K performance on your G-Prex Superlight 2. Who would have thought that? One issue that I did have, even with the stock cable though, was the polling kind of just going missing, or like just having these insane spikes in delay when tracking it with 4K. This happens very sporadically and randomly, and this is something that you absolutely can feel. I did message Pulsar about this, but I haven't heard back from them ever again. So definitely take this into consideration if you're thinking about getting that 4K dongle. But yet again, I don't know if I'm the only one having that issue, but I've definitely reported it already a while ago. Now, when it comes to my personal opinion about these mice, I personally can't recommend these normal versions. I don't know what it's like for the Demon Slayer version, which apparently has some improvements, but I don't want to talk about that because I don't think that you should buy a new version just to get a better version than the actual product itself. So from my experience and also seeing the experience from all of my reviewer friends, all that I can say is I would not recommend getting the stock black versions because that is all I can talk about. Of course, the same goes for the white version as well, but in the current state with the mods that you need to do to actually make this enjoyable to use compared to, yet again, most other mice out there on the market that are in the same price category or even much cheaper, I simply can't recommend it. Now, to the conclusion, who is this mouse for? If all of the humps out there on the market that are available for you to purchase right now are simply not steep enough, get one of these mice. You can't get a wireless claw grip focused shape with a hump this big out there on the market. So if that is something you enjoy, and you also enjoy that more curvature compared to the very flat sides previously on the normal versions, definitely get one of these mice according to your sizing preference. Now, if you don't know what your preference is, I would say that for an aggressive or a relaxed claw grip for the mini version, I wouldn't go for it unless your hands are like 20 by 10 or smaller. And if your hands are bigger than that, definitely go for the medium version. Don't take that as a strict guide, just take that as a personal recommendation from me. If you don't know what to get whatsoever. If you've already owned a gaming mouse or two, and you know what kind of shape and size you like, just get whatever you think would suit you better personally. Now, if you don't want a insanely steep dumpy, don't get this thing. Don't get the mini either. These are insanely specific shapes. These are not safe recommendations whatsoever. Only think about it if you actually want that really steep hump for a claw grip or even a palm grip, just because it can fill your palm out that much. And that's really about it. I personally cannot recommend the standard black and white version so far, because I'm having issues on both, especially the rubber pads for the post-travel, and also this mini version I simply cannot use because of tracking issues. Other than that, that's about it for this video. I will be reviewing the Vaximize very soon, especially since my base for the NP01S is now done, and you can get this thing down below 60 grams very easily with my new base. So definitely hit the subscribe button and also the notification bell if you want to be reminded of my video when it actually comes out, because that is definitely something you can look forward to. I'm also constantly testing out new mice and also have old mice lying around that I still need to review. So there will be tons of videos coming out very soon, just at a bit of a slower pace because I'm still sick. Other than that, thanks for watching this sick video, and I'll see you guys very soon. Peace out.